You don't have to be a business person to have an investor mindset. And so I think that word's for all of us to ask the Holy Spirit, what would you have me give? We can sow seeds into that. And so boys and girls, that also includes you. You're bringing kids to camp that might not know Jesus. You hear from the Holy Spirit too. He might want to speak to you that there's something you can even financially sow into that. You can talk to your mom and dad about that. We're going to dismiss you to your classes. You'll see all kinds of things up there. I just wanted to say, if you wanted to give today, there's all kinds of different ways, and you can see the different ways up on the screen. Have a wonderful time in Kids Church today. You're going to learn great things, and Pastor Trav has a really, really exciting word today that I can't wait for you to share.
Right on. Hopefully it doesn't make you too uncomfortable that we just turned the lights up. It's because I want to see you this morning.
And people like to take notes. And it's hard to see in the dark.
Sure.
So sometimes we change things. We're going to see if this works so they can take notes.
All right. Well, it's nice to see you all this morning. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Kenton. Nice to see you guys. This is great, actually. I like seeing people. You know, one day I would really like it if we had our own church building, because then we could have like really great ambient lighting and it wouldn't have to be too bright or too dark. Nobody else is excited about that? I am excited. I can't tell you about all the good things that are going on with our building process and our project and our land. We are seeing a little forward progression here and there, and it is pretty exciting stuff, pretty exciting times. And I can't wait to talk to you about that more in the near future. But today I just wanted to use that as bait to hold your attention for a moment while I drop some serious truth on you, while I smack you in the face with some truth this morning. Who wants to be smacked in the face today? Anybody? Okay, thank you, Haley. I appreciate it. Wes, I don't really want to smack Wes too hard. He might fight back. I had the privilege this week of being invited by a charitable organization to hear about some of the things they're doing in our world. And it was a profound time for me. Just because we're recording the service and it actually goes on a live stream today, I'm not even going to drop the name because I want to tell you about some of the things they're doing. And I just don't want to draw any negative, perceived negative press to them. But this organization that I got to spend time with, first of all, they were really nice to me. They got me a nice hotel room, and then they took me golfing in Kananaskis, which was amazing and refreshing and wonderful. So that was all really good. But they really got to talk with us about, and there were several other pastors there, got to talk with us about what some of the church is facing in other parts of the world. And I don't know if you noticed, but media is not really trustworthy these days. Like, there's a lot of, like, who do you trust when you watch the media? The right, the left, the middle, everybody's kind of over dramatic. Nobody really tells the news. Like, I miss Lloyd Robertson. Anyone remember Lloyd Robertson? Like, he was just so grandfatherly, and every night at 11 o'clock in this part of the world, he'd come on CTV, and it was just like, it was like Grandpa was telling you what really happened that day, and it felt good. And that's not the days we live in anymore. And I'm sure that in media, and even in the news world, I'm sure there's actually people who love Jesus somewhere in there. But what I appreciated about this ministry that I got to spend time with is they actually have people on the ground in places like China, and in places like Iran, and specifically in the nation of Myanmar. And those three places are really on my heart. They were on my heart before, but now I got to tell you, because I feel a connection with what's going on there. And so it's something that we're going to be looking to support as a church, because these ministries that are happening all over the world, there's a real need, and there's a real cost associated with that need. There's really big problems that have to be overcome. There are entire networks that need to be built. For instance, in Iran right now, people are leaving the religion of Islam in Iran. The young generation is sick and tired of the political regime being so extreme, so violent, so overbearing. And so there's young kids growing up in Iran today who are going, I don't want Islam in my life. And you know what they're turning to? Either secularism or Christianity. Did you know that in Iran it's illegal to own a Bible, to have a Bible, to be in possession of a Bible? Here's something I really love about this organization. They're trying right now to smuggle 76,000 Bibles into Iran. Now, you say, well, that's great, because our relationship with the Bible, for the most part, is like, yeah, my kid turned 12, I got them a Bible. Here's what a Bible means to someone, to a Christian in the nation of Iran. It means a church. A Bible isn't something that you give to your 12-year-old in Iran. It's something you give to someone who got saved because God has called them to plant a church. And they don't have any other means. They don't have any other way to have the Bible. And so there's a cost that's associated with that. But I need you to hear this right now. 76,000 Bibles is not the Bibles going into the hands of 76,000 people. It's going into the heart of 76,000 churches. Some of those churches will be 12 people. Some of them will be thousands of people. But it's important to me that that's one aspect of what we do in our ministry as a church, that we are involved somehow in touching the world and changing the world far from here. Now, we also are going to touch the world right here in our city. But I gotta let you know this morning, because the title of the message is the invitation, Counting or Cutting the Cost. And it's a question for you today. Are you a cost cutter or are you a cost counter? I forgot to tell you this part. This is my favorite part about what's going on in Iran. You know that Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq, like they're all run by the same government, right? The Taliban, ISIS supported government. But those three, you know what those three nations do a lot of? They grow a lot of opium. Opium that eventually ends up probably here in Grand Prairie, destroying people's lives. This is my favorite part of what these guys are doing in Iran right now, though. They need to smuggle Bibles in. So you know who they're using to smuggle the Bibles in? The guys who are smuggling the opium out. I just think this is one of the greatest trades Iran could ever make. Right? I mean, it's not that we don't need opium. We don't want opium on our streets. We're all in agreement on that. But I just love the fact that today in our world, God is still confounding the wisdom of people in this world to make it look like foolishness for His purposes. And so the van is leaving those nations full of opium to destroy the world. And we have godly men and women who are saying, well, let's fill those empty trucks with Bibles and put it right back into Iran. And you know what's going to happen in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan as the Word of God begins to saturate and permeate those nations? The farmers are going to stop growing opium because they love Jesus. But there's a cost. Just so you know, the cost of that operation, 20 Canadian dollars per Bible. I asked our young adults this weekend at our young adults gathering, so how many Bibles could our young adults group get into Iran, do you think? It was a really good conversation. And I was like, oh yeah, these young adults in our church, they'd give $1,000. Here's where the conversation ended, just to lovingly shame the rest of our church into action. I was like, okay, yeah, they could easily do 1,000. So I threw $1,000 at them. Could you do $1,000? We could get this many Bibles into Iran. They're like, more like $1,000 a person. We should be able to raise $1,000 from each person in our young adults group. Now, for me, I'm sorry, my faith begins to fail. But I sure love the heart. And I think that as we get to have that conversation, young adults, you guys are going to set a crazy high standard for what our church begins to do to impact the world. So what is the cost of a Bible? Well, it's $20 to get it into Iran. But what's the cost of the work that has to be done here at home? I want to share a story that Jesus was telling in the Gospels this morning. I want you to track with me as we walk through this story. We're going to read from Luke chapter 14. And a couple weeks ago, I talked on the beginning of this parable. When we kicked off this series, I talked to you about the cost of a wedding. And we talked about the parable that Jesus told about the master who threw a wedding reception for his son, and how he invited people to come, and people were like, nah, I got more important things to do, and that really got the master upset. And if you go back, maybe you'll recall some of this. If you want to, you can read it in the Gospels. Luke chapter 14, you can read. I can't remember where it starts. Previous to verse 25 is that parable. But I want to read to you today starting in verse 25, and it says this: a large crowd was following Jesus. And he turned around and said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and mother and wife and children and boys and brothers and sisters. Yes, even your own life. Now, here's the sticky part. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. Okay, thank you for not running out of the room. Because I know that hate is a big word, right? Like in our household growing up, hate was a word that was off limits. In my childhood, it was a word that was off limits. We certainly raised our kids that way. But I need you to always remember this. English is not the only language in the world. And English, frankly, is a terrible language. Ate, wait, rate. Just think of the spellings that are involved in those three appearances of those words. You can spell those three words at least 9 different ways. Some of them share letters and forms. Some of them are totally opposite. E-I-G-H-T-A-T-E. Right? We could go on and on and on. Maybe some of you have seen some reels on social media about how awkward and funny it is to teach English to people with all the confusing language we have. So there's good news for you and I. But I want to start at this. Before you get too lost on the word hate and start shutting your brain down and going to other things, I want you to hear the words that started this. A large crowd was following Jesus. And those are really important words. Here's why. Because it's really easy to follow Jesus if you perceive that's what everyone's doing. And so Jesus is doing miracles. He's preaching great messages. He's doing the things that he does. And he's healing people and performing signs and wonders. So everybody's like, heck yeah, this is awesome. I'm going to follow Jesus. And Jesus the whole time knows ultimately, I am going to the cross. And all who follow me are going to die terrible deaths at the hands of government, at the hands of religious people. And so as this large crowd is now following Jesus, you can imagine. At one point he just turns around and says, hey, thank you for all coming today. I appreciate that you appreciate everything I'm doing for you. But here's something I have to tell you. Unless you hate your mother, unless you hate your father, unless you hate your children, unless you hate, you cannot be my disciple. Now, how would that play on social media today? It would not play well, would it? Well, I got good news for you. Because English is not the language the scriptures were written in, we get to dive a little bit deeper into what something means. And so the word hate in the Greek certainly means what we think it means. It means to hate something. But here's what I need you to hold on to in this moment. It's not such a hard pass, maybe, if you can understand this. The word is miseo. And it means, in a proper sense, to detest something on a comparative basis. So, this is where I'm going to give you permission to use some words. Because in my house, and some of you have probably heard this, I'm a guy who says things like this all the time. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't say, I love ice cream, because love is a profoundly powerful, awesome word. Quit making it about food. Okay? But I'm gonna be a hypocrite now. I'm going to say, even though I raised my kids, don't say hate. Don't talk like that. Don't do it. I need you to come on this little journey with me, so we got to get here. On a comparative basis, it's totally fine to hate something. On a comparative basis. Like, for instance, Jamie Tennant loves Ford trucks. On a comparative basis, I hate Ford trucks. And the truth is, I hate them all because they all break down and they all cost way too much money. Right? Every truck, all the men in the church, every truck is a heartbreaker, is it not? Yeah. Amen. So we got some amens. Come on. That'll preach. All right? I'm proud to bring the gospel of Chevy to you today. Just kidding. There's a reason why Dodge and Demon both start with the same letter. On a comparative basis, you have to hate your mother. This is weird because my mom sits in church. But on a comparative basis, Jesus or my mom? Jesus, not me. Jesus says, unless you hate your mother, you cannot be my disciple. Moralistic people in this day and age will have a huge time following Jesus. Even though they've gutted the word love. Even though they have devalued the word hate. That word hate, meseo, means to denounce something. To love someone or something less than someone or something else. Do you hear that? The word hate in the Greek, it's not a burning, rage-filled hatred. It is to love someone less than someone else. And I love Virgil. But how many of you know I'm not going home with Virgil tonight? I'm gonna go home with my wife because I love my wife and I love Virgil very much so less than my wife. I prefer my wife. I prefer Virgil much, much, much less than my wife. Unless we're going to bust out guitars and play some really sloppy guitar. Some of that made you uncomfortable, I know. It means to renounce one's choice in favor, to renounce one thing in favor of something better. So Jesus isn't saying, I want you to have a sulfur and brimstone burning hatred for your mother, for your father, for your children, for your property, for your house. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, what I demand of you is that you hate those things in comparison to me. Well, that doesn't sound like the Jesus I heard about. You were hearing about the wrong Jesus. I got in trouble for saying something about the Jesus people believed in a few months ago, so I won't say it again. I learned a lesson. But I still believe it's true. Some people just don't believe in the right Jesus. It's not hatred in the sense of wipe it off the face of the earth. But it's a willingness in the same way that the men and women of old were willing to pick up and move. We're willing to, think of Abraham offering Isaac on an altar to God. And right up to the moment, Isaac's hands are bound. And the altar is built and the wood is laid upon the altar. And Abraham, his father, has a knife and he's ready to follow the instruction of God to the logical end of God's request. And in that moment, God provides a sacrificial ram. Let me ask you something. Did Abraham hate Isaac? Well, of course not. He loved, it was his only son at that point. He loved him more than life itself. In fact, I would suggest that if Abraham had to choose between his life and his son's life, what was he going to offer? He would offer his own life. Why? Because he would hate his own life rather than not love his son at a higher level. But if you can just begin to understand this, stop believing. Listen, the enemy takes a story like that from the Bible and wants to create false dilemmas for you in your life. You know, like Satan comes along, he's like, hey, George. I don't know if that's even a good Satan voice. Does it sound, do you even know what Satan sounds like? Not really, me neither. Hey, George. If you follow Jesus, he's going to make you sacrifice your firstborn son. Right? That's a false dilemma. I have 4 children. God has not asked me to literally sacrifice any of them. He has required me to lay them on the altar of my life. In that they are not mine to control. They are not mine to direct. They are arrows in my hand. But there comes a place where I don't get to say, God gets to say what happens with them. And in that, I hate my children. I hate saying the word hate. I miseo my children. That sounds a little better. I miseo you, Mom. Babe, I love you, but I also miseo you. Don't fall for the false dilemma. Loving Jesus more than I love my wife is what has allowed me to love my wife the way she deserves. Right? And do you see why the enemy wants you to fall for a false dilemma? The enemy will come to you with the false dilemma. Well, God told you to start your business, so you better give your business everything. This is what Satan literally says to some of you. God gave you that job. You better show up for that job. In fact, you better not go to church on Sunday because that job is the most important thing because God gave it to you. That is a false dilemma. And the trickery of that false dilemma tries to fool you into loving what God gave you more than you love God by your actions. And can you see the problem with this church? This is where we live. We live with the enemy constantly screaming at us, false dilemma after false dilemma, when God is going, if you would just understand to seek my kingdom first, to love me first, I will supply for everything that you need in every area of your life, in every concern of your life. I will be your provider. But you gotta love me first. You gotta hate everything else. You gotta forsake this world. You need to lose your life so that you can find life in me. This is actually the good news of Jesus. Man, I was listening to a book by a guy named Dallas Willard called Life Without Lack, and he just said so. He's dead. He's with Jesus now. Amazing story, amazing book. You should read the book. I'll say it again. Life Without Lack, Dallas Willard. It will take you a long time to read because it is theologically deep and profound and hard to read, but it's brilliant. How many of you have heard somebody, and I hope it wasn't in our church, but I fear it might have been, someone say, Jesus died so you wouldn't have to. Anybody ever heard something like that? Hey, Jesus died on a cross for us so we wouldn't have to die on a cross. That's not true. It wasn't true for some of his disciples. Like Peter literally died on a cross like Jesus did, except upside down. Here's the truth. Jesus died on that cross so that you and I could die on it as well. Because you and I are to be crucified with Christ so that we can live. You and I are called in the scriptures to daily put our life, put our old nature to death. And we can't do that without Jesus. You can't crucify yourself. There's a process around that. It takes help. When Jesus says this, you have to carry your own cross. This is what he's alluding to. I'm going to carry a cross, and you have to carry a cross. I don't know if you think about the timing of when this happened. And I'm sure that as Jesus is walking around, he can point to obvious examples of the cross. You got to carry your own cross, Jesus said. And if you're unwilling to carry your own cross, you cannot be my disciple. Wow. We got some doctrinal holes in the North American church that need to be sewn up. And that's one of them. Jesus died for me so that I could die to myself. Plain and simple. And that is a painful process. Don't let anybody tell you anything else. And it's hard, but it's worth it. And it's good. My children have to carry their own cross. Hey, moms, happy Sunday. The thought of your children carrying their own cross. I don't know what it's like for Keegan and Casey holding Jack this morning. He's like a week old. Jack has to carry his own cross? He's a baby. Yeah. And we want Jack to grow up in a church where he learns to love Jesus more than life itself. Because the promise Jesus gives is if you seek to find your life, you're going to lose it. But when you lay your life down, when you give your life to Jesus, you find life. Bigger and better life than you could have known otherwise. Jesus goes on in his lecture this day. But don't begin. Sorry. Did I miss? Oh no, it's here. Don't begin to follow me until you count the cost, is what he says. But don't begin to be my disciple until you count this cost. For who would begin the construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Now, understand, please, somebody say analogy. This is an analogy. Jesus is not talking about literally building a building or a tower. But the principles will still work for building anything, okay? So who begins the construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money. And Pastor Trav says, amen, 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 because I'm in a 5 or 6 year renovation that we thought, well, we'll just do it like 10 grand at a time. So we literally keep running out of money. And it sucks to build that way. And I think it sucks, and Amy thinks it sucks 10,000 times more. 50,000 times. 100,000? It's a lot of times more. And as moms and wives, you can probably imagine. The whole nesting thing is hard, right? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone will laugh at you. They would say, there's a person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. Now, here's what I need you to understand. Jesus is not literally talking about someone building a building. He is talking about someone who chooses to build their life on him. That is the context of this conversation. That is the context of this metaphor. It's not about a building. It's about who Curtis decides to build his life on. And it's important to count the cost of that. We're going to get to what that means to count the cost in just a few moments. But here's what we need to understand more than anything. For any one of us in this room who has said, I'm going to choose to follow Jesus, Jesus Christ said, hey, before you decide to be my disciple, I'm asking you to count the cost of that. To consider what it costs, because we end up in a problem when we don't do that. And I'm not worried that people are going to laugh at me because I didn't finish the race with Jesus. I will finish the race with Jesus because I have counted the cost. I have laid my life down for his service. And you're called to do the same. Once again, the enemy comes along creating a false dilemma for you. Well, Pastor Trav is a pastor, and if you're going to lay your life down like Pastor Trav, then you have to become a pastor. No, you don't. What I do with Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, Saturday and Sunday has nothing to do with what you have to do on those days. Other than the fact that we might be in community together. You got to count the cost. You got to lay your life down. If you want to finish the race, if you want to achieve the thing that God has for your life to achieve, man, you got to lay your life down for that. You have to count the cost. It's key because the operative word in this metaphor is the construction. It's construction. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost? I want to submit this for your consideration right now. If the building part is the active part, it's really, really easy to get into that process and become a cost cutter instead of a cost counter. And here's the problem with that. If you choose to follow Jesus, you don't have a choice or not anymore whether to build or not. If you're going to follow Jesus, you are building your life on Jesus. And you can blame leaders and fallen people in churches, and you can blame the devil, but here's where we oftentimes end up. We end up saying, yeah, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. The world behind me, the cross before me. I have decided to follow Jesus. We get a little ways in and we're like, man, this is expensive. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to become a discount disciple. I'm not going to pray every day. It costs too much. I need to sleep. Well, you know, when I started following Jesus, I was at church every single Sunday. It's amazing. I went to the Bible study. I showed up for the young adults. I showed up to help. But it just got too expensive, you know. So I had to start giving myself some discounts because I deserve it. I deserve to pay less. Pay less shoes says I should pay less. The grocery stores all say I should pay less. The federal government says I should pay less. They're lying. We should all just pay less, guys. Can you see the problem with that logic? Our church, we have a hard time getting people to serve in kids ministry. Why? Because some of you want to pay less. Love you. Some of you want to pay less. And Jesus says when you do that, you're the person who got as far as the foundation and ran out of time, out of money, out of will to get it done. Church, you don't want to run out. Because here is it's a fallacy, it's a false dilemma the enemy wants to create for you to wrestle with. Because what does the scripture say about what Jesus has done for us? It says he has given us everything pertaining to life and godliness. And my God shall supply for all your need according to his glorious riches. Let me ask you something. If we went out for lunch today, let's just pretend that I bought a lottery ticket and won $90 million. So because I'm a generous guy, the very first thing I would do after giving tithe first fruits, I would say, you know what? I'm going to buy the church lunch. I'd probably do something cooler, but let's just pretend, because we're pretending right now. I'm going to buy the church lunch. We go out, and you guys all know, because they published it, that I have $90 million in the bank. And I'm a good guy, so I take all of us out to lunch. We go over to the Boston Pizza. They're like, what the heck is happening? We'll go to the Keg. Not Boston Pizza. We're going to the Keg, and all of us walk into the Keg, a couple hundred people, and they're like, whoa. We eat the meal. Alex orders a big steak. Wesley orders a bigger steak. John Stauffer orders half of what they have in the back. Eats it all. The server does a really, really good job. She takes good care of us. One server, all of us at once. It's amazing. It's a miracle story. Okay? And we get to the end of the meal, and you're like, oh, I'm so glad Pastor Travis is catching this bill. He's taking the bill. Just what would you think of me if we got that bill, and I'm like, well, I have no problem paying for the bill. We ate the food. But the waitress's tip. Can you imagine even for a moment if I was like, I'm going to tip 10%? Like, I can't even calculate what the tip should be for serving steak to 200 people, especially when they eat like Alex, Wes, and John Stauffer. But just think about it. I think it would be right that you actually despise me. I think it would be right that you'd be like, looks like money did change him. Not so generous. But here's why I'm telling you this story. Listen, it would be totally foolish for me having $90 million in the bank to be worried about whether or not a server gets 10%, 8%, 18%, 25%, because we all know full well I could tip 100%. When you become a discount disciple, when you become someone who's not really willing to count the cost, but only to start cutting the cost because you feel stretched and you feel tired and you feel unsupplied, it's because you are not living in the supply. You're not living in the overflow of what God called you to live in. And believe me, church, He called you to live in the overflow of life. He called you to live in the overflow of his blessing. How do we get that blessing? Well, you buy this prayer handkerchief. No. That's another false dilemma. I'm not going to give to the church. There's churches who abuse money. Absolutely there are. We're still trying to build the kingdom of God. Somebody needs Jesus today. And what's the cost of that? What's the cost of a soul worth to you? And long before you think we're after your money in this church, we are far more after your time and your heart and your energy and your prayer and your emotion and your commitment long before. What's the cost of one of our kids out there? What's the cost of their relationship with Jesus worth? What's the cost? And more importantly, are you one who counts the cost? Or are you one who starts cutting the cost? Well, the kids ministry doesn't need that. And I've served in churches with that heart and attitude. You want to know what happens? After about 10 years, there's no kids in the church. Well, youth ministry can't cost. Oh, it costs. Here's the cost of youth ministry. Doritos and Coca-Cola. In infinite supply. If you feed them, they will come. Don't cut the costs on that church. Don't cut the costs on young adult. Don't cut the cost on Bible camp. Because if you cut the cost, you'll lose the people. Even Jesus had to feed the people. Come on. What do we have to feed them? Well, Lord, they should go get their own food. Chick-fil-A opened up. Send them back to town. Lord, they can't go to town. They have nothing to eat. Okay, well, what do we have? Well, we got some fishes and some loaves. See, people who cut costs, what they're really, really good, they're very analytical people. And you can receive this as a compliment this morning for the moment, if you're a cost cutter. Because I thank God for cost cutters, because I would spend too much all the time. So we do need some people to like, hey, analytics are important. Can't spend it all, especially if you want to get paid still. Well, that's a consideration for sure. When you stop counting costs and start cutting costs, the only thing to do is subtract. You just start subtracting. And I have to do this in my house because sometimes my wife likes to spend lots of money too. It's like, well, we can't afford that, babe. And you know what she does to me in that moment? She looks at me like I'm stupid. And here's where she's okay to do that. Because what's my role? My role is to go find the money. She says, in tears, we need a swimming pool. What? Why do we need a swimming pool? I would like to finish our house. We need a swimming pool. The kids are leaving home. It's like the last summer, Logan's gone. Jacon's over 18. The girls are going to be gone before we know it. And she's literally... And I'm going, well, no, it's wise. It's prudent for us to not spend that money on that thing. And what will happen in my house? Well, my kids won't be there. And every one of us is faced with this reality at some point in time. So let me ask you, are you a cost cutter or are you a cost counter? Cost counters go out and say, I'll find the money. I know what it costs, therefore I will go and find what I need from a God who supplies for all our need, according to his glorious riches. Worship team, you can come back. I'm going to just power through the rest of this. See, you don't have a choice whether or not to build. And eventually as a church, we're going to get to the place where we are going to build. We got the land. It's there. We got it cleaned up. It's all looking pretty. I'm going to mow a path hopefully this week so you can all go over there and start prayer walking around that place. Just around and around and around until the building goes up. See, Jericho, they went around until the building came down. Here's what I want to prophesy over our church. We're going to send some people over there. You're going to walk around and around and around that property until the building goes up. Somebody say amen. All right. I think that's an awesome reverse Jericho scenario. We should even call it the Reverse Jericho Initiative. Walking around till the building goes up. See, when you start building, you don't have a choice. If you're going to build your life on Jesus, you're going to build. You don't really get to opt out of that because you're a living stone being faced, being cut, being chiseled, being fit into a spiritual house is what the Bible tells us. And so because that is our reality, then we have to go and figure out how to meet the needs that are arising from the cost of our building. Too many people start in Jesus and quit when their resources get pinched. Well, I like Jesus, I like the forgiveness of sin part, but I really wanted to sleep with that girl. And they said that wasn't okay according to the Bible, so I'm out. It's cutting a cost, not counting the cost. We know the context of this as we travel through the rest of what Jesus has to say. Here's what he goes. He talks about building the tower, and then he goes on to fighting a battle. Listen to this, verse 31. What king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he would send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while his enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. We know that those two thoughts are connected because they're the same thought. Like biblically speaking, theologically speaking. A king going out to war, he's got 10,000, he's got to fight twice as many people. That means that every one of his soldiers would have to kill 2 of the enemy soldiers without dying. Or if people start dying, then they might have to kill 5. Like, what are the odds? Well, it's simple. It's 2 to 1. That's where the odds start. I just want you to notice that Jesus doesn't really discuss not dealing with the battle. Jesus doesn't make it an option about building in this story, and he doesn't make it an option about the battle in this story. There is the build, and there is also the battle. You don't get a choice in that matter. You are going to build your life on Jesus, and you are going to have to fight some battles. The provision is, while the enemy is still far away, are you wise enough to negotiate the peace? Because the battle is there. And Jesus in that scenario then says this, and this is kind of weird if you think about it. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. And I know most of you glaze over this when you read this stuff. It's like, I don't know. What does he say? If the king in this scenario gets to the place he says, you know what? It's a lot of really big guys against a lot of really small guys. I don't know that we can pull this off. In the old times, what would happen when kings would go to war? And remember, like in that part of the world, even to this day, war is kind of like a part-time job. Like literally, factions are it's what they do for work. They get up and they go and they shoot AK-47s at each other, and then they come home to their families. Like there are warring factions in the world. The world is not like Canada. But what happens in the old days when the kings would go to war is they would look and they would find out, oh, that guy's he's gonna send an army. So they would do smart things like get some of their kids married. Well, I got a really good looking daughter. And if I align myself through marriage with that king, then he's not gonna need to attack me because now we're family, right? Some of you, have you read this in history? This happened through Europe. It happened through the Middle East. It's happened all over the world. Many wars were not fought because there was the giving and the receiving in marriage. Or maybe they would send a gift, a financial gift. Okay, listen, we don't feel like fighting today. What we're willing to do is give you 50,000 pieces of gold, 80,000 pieces of silver, and a bunch of cedar logs. And the other king who was doing this thing, like, actually, you know what? That sounds good. We're friends again. Like that's the context of what Jesus is saying. There is a cost to the peace. And you have to battle for the peace. There's a cost to the peace. Jesus went on to say this. You can't become my disciple without giving up everything you own. The cost of peace is everything you own. The cost of peace is everything. Whatever you got, that's what it costs. And then he goes on in verse 34, it says, salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? It's a rhetorical question. You can't. Right? Salt loses saltiness. You can't resalt it. At least not to my mind, not to my knowledge. But then he goes on, he says, flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It's thrown away. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Okay, what the heck? I gotta build, and I gotta battle, and to do that, it costs me everything. I have to give up everything I own to be his disciple. And then the salt thing. Listen, counting the cost is not limited by the odds. Counting the cost is not limited by the odds, because God is always calling us to do something that is impossible for us and only possible in him. So the odds don't factor in the sake of the battle. Of course God is going to call you to go to war against 20,000 people. God called Gideon to fight 3 separate nations at the same time with 300 people. Hello? He is not a God of odds. He's not a God of odds. He's a God of supply. He's a God of provision. He's a God of healing. He's a God of peace. He's the God of fellowship. Come on. So you might not have what it takes to build everything in your own eyes this morning. And it's true, you don't. You do not have what it takes to build what God wants to build in your life. Yet. And the thing that we've all found as we walk with Jesus is that as we take the steps, suddenly the provision starts to come into place. Time and time again. It's the story of my life. We planted Generations Church with nobody. Like 0 people. Eventually Tyson and Anita came and we had 4 kids. Well, plus there are 3 kids. We didn't have the provision to go any farther until we followed Jesus that far. And it's going to be the same for you. So you can't look at the cost that you need to acquire in this moment. You have to understand that it costs everything and trust God to supply for everything. Because I know this about every one of you, that in your heart and in your mind, you want to be generous people. I know that in your heart and in your mind, you want to be people of victory. I know that in your heart and in your mind, you want to be people of miracle power. I know that in your heart and in your mind, you want to be people of the Word of God, people of the Spirit of God. I know in your heart and your mind, you want to be a worshiper who's free to worship God with all extravagance. I know this about you. You wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't in your heart to become that at some point. But I just got to tell you, in this message today, you will never get there cutting the cost. Too many churches are full of the coupon Christian mindset. Coupon Christians, that's not what heaven's built of. That's not what the kingdom of heaven is. Discount disciples. Oh, this was my favorite. The dollar store disciple. Anybody really come to church today thinking, you know what? I'm going to be a dollar store disciple of Jesus today. I'm going to go in and get a good deal on a crappy product. Even the dollar store is not a single dollar anymore. Good grief, it's a dollars store. You can't cut the costs. You got to count the cost. You got to figure out what it's going to cost you and commit to what it's going to cost you. Because it's worth it. Where we get to at the end, when we stand in heaven before Jesus, and lost people who were once far from God have now been brought near God, are standing shoulder to shoulder with you and I because they gave their life to Jesus. That's the end. That's the race we're trying to run and finish. How many people are going to get saved in this city because of what you have to offer? How many people are going to come to Jesus because of the gift you are, the gift you can bring, the finances, or the idea, or the work, or the time that you can offer? The problem that we face with getting what God wants done is that we have to figure out how to afford that. Because that's what it means to count the cost. Well, how are we going to afford that? How am I going to afford a swimming pool for my wife? Income tax return, that's how. Forced savings. You got to count the cost, which means I got to figure out what this is going to take to get this done. You figure out as best as you can what it takes to do what God wants. You adjust the timeline. Somebody needs to hear this morning. You adjust your timeline so that God gets what He wants. You go without some stuff so that you can get some stuff. That's how you do it. That's what is often called a sacrifice. You have to hate what you have to get to the good stuff that you want. And I admit this week I hated some stuff that I had. Being a terrible golfer in a beautiful golf course with really good golfers, you know what the first thing I did? I started looking at my golf clubs. And I looked at my Callaway knockoffs that are over 20 years old, and I'm like, those aren't very good golf clubs. I hate you, golf clubs. You know what I'm going to do, golf clubs? When I get back home, I'm going to start thinking about getting rid of you because I hate you. I esteem you less than some golf clubs that will surely make me a better golfer. We all know that is false. It's a false dichotomy. Or false, whatever the word that was. False dichotomy. That's all wrong. You got to hate some stuff to get to the good stuff. Hate it. Some of you got to hate your truck. So you got to hate your job a little more. All right, you got to Miseo your job. Mom, some of you got to Miseo your kids because Jesus wants more time with you. Does that mean I neglect my kids? No, you don't have to neglect your kids to spend more time with Jesus. Count the cost. Adjust your schedule, figure it out, spend time with Jesus. You won't regret that. If you want a better marriage, then hate something to get your marriage to a better place. It's okay to look for the upgrade if it's a kingdom upgrade. Tell me something, church. Do you want to upgrade your walk with God? Anybody at all? Stand up if you want to upgrade your walk with God. Just stand up. Oh yeah, I'm going to upgrade my walk with God. Anybody want to upgrade their prayer life this morning? Just wave a hand. Upgrade your prayer life. Anybody want to upgrade your worship? Just wave your hand. You want to upgrade? What else? You want to upgrade something with Jesus? Hate something that's not working. Put it behind you. Put it to death. Walk away from it and start following after the one who can supply for everything that you're going to need. Listen, Jesus' invitation to you today is to build and to battle, build and battle, build and battle, build and battle. That's the invitation. He's saying, daughter, I want you to build and battle. Son, I want you to build. I want you to battle. The call that He has for you and I is not only expensive, it's also expansive. It's huge. It's bigger than you thought it was. It's going to cost more than you thought it was. You thought your life was going to get to this point, and that's all that God had for you. And I'm telling you this morning that God's saying, nope, I've got a farther place to take you. I've got a better mountain for you to climb. I've got a better room to show you in my house. I've got a bigger provision for you. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about something that's of real value. Listen. Don't be in danger of being the Christian who's stuck today in the fixed rate system. Well, I don't like paying more for things. Yeah, well, it doesn't cost today what it cost yesterday. Right? Everything costs more today than it did last week. And it's always going to be true of your life with Jesus. It's going to cost me more this week to serve Jesus than it did last week. And I have learned that it is well with my soul, that it is a good thing for me. Here's the promise I want to leave you with before we sing one last song together. Mark 10:29 says this, and hear this, please. And everyone who has given up houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or property for my sake will receive 100 times as much in return and will inherit eternal life. Those of us who know how to count the cost so that we can follow Jesus will receive 100 times what it costs us. And I'm not talking about dollars. I'm talking about joy. I'm talking about peace. I'm talking about life. So we're going to sing this worship song because it's got a really great lyric. And this morning, if you'd like prayer, over on this side of the auditorium, we're going to have our prayer team. In fact, prayer team, you guys might as well head there right now. The lyrics that we're about to sing are, I will not give that which costs me nothing. You give me more than I deserve. And that's going to be our prayer that we close on this morning. And if you'd like prayer as we sing the song, please go get prayer. Look, prayer team, you guys all look friendly. Just wave at everybody. You guys are awesome. They are trustworthy, loving people. You don't have to leave this place the same that you came. We're going to sing these words. And I want you to make it your prayer. It's my prayer for you. It's my prayer for me. I hope it's your prayer for you and your prayer for me and for our church. Father, we thank you again for Jesus. We thank you for, God, who you are and what you've done for us. Holy Spirit, I pray that you would just drive it really, really deep. Drive it home this morning, Lord. Love you, Jesus. Sing this. I will not give. I will not bring that which costs me nothing. You've given more than I deserve. I offer you a love that's come on, only because you love me. Sing it again. I will not bring that which costs me nothing. You've given more than I deserve. I offer you a love that's burning, only because you love me. I will not bring that which costs me nothing. You've given more than I deserve. I offer you a love that's burning, I don't need you to get all the way there today. My hope is that you will get at least a big step closer. I'm going to leave you with this thought. We're going to let you go, cut you loose. Your consideration of what you heard today costs absolutely nothing. And I'm going to say this real strong to you. Your consideration is worthless unless you act on it. Consideration is cheap. Consideration is dirt cheap. Unless you act, unless you put your feet on the ground, unless you put your money where your mouth is, unless you put your grain in the ground. I love you guys. Love you guys. And guys, as a church, we are going somewhere amazing. I encourage you to buy all the way in. Go all in with us. Because God is taking us in this city to an amazing destination. Jesus, let your peace be on these people today, I pray. In your holy name, amen. Okay, I think the lights can come back on one last time. Like we're going for a strobe effect. It's all good. Love you guys. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Camp is on its way. Don't forget to pray. Make your cookies. Bring your offerings. Let's pull off a great event together.